13. So tonight I am feeling to continue on where we left off last time, which was the four attainments. Tonight will be about the three paths. These are part of the fundamental languaging of my teaching, the journey of consciousness, the four attainments, the three paths. We will later talk about the three gunas and the human system. These are introductory to orient you to the languaging of my work, and actually I hope is a simplification of the nature of the spiritual path for everyone who's come to this stage of the journey. Having traveled this process, I keep looking to make it understandable, because understanding is very helpful when you go through a process that affects all of you. At least the mental part of the human nature can have a context for what's happening to it when the spiritual journey begins. Because forces are at work that are beyond the mental, that are beyond our normal paradigm for experience or knowing or acting. And there is a way of moving into alignment with this natural unfolding. And so understanding these principles is the first step in your collaboration with your own spiritual journey. One thing you should know is that when spiritual awakening occurs, when someone gets pulled to the spiritual path, there's no guarantee how long before the journey is complete. It can be lifetimes. It can be many, many years. Only in very few cases does it occur in a relatively short period of time, 3 years, 6 years, 9 years. But be clear about the nature of the spiritual journey. This is not a get rich quick scheme. This is a long haul where the very foundational structures of who you think you are and what you think this world is about get revealed, unraveled, and reorganized. So it's a very fundamental change to discover who you are as consciousness instead of who you are as a person with thoughts and feelings and a body and a mind. Now, this is a very big reversal. Some souls can do this journey more quickly. Most souls, it'll take a long time. And my suggestion always is that it's going to take as long, exactly as long as necessary for each of you. And kicking and screaming and not wanting it to take so long and wanting it quicker is one of those ways you can make it more difficult for yourself. So realistic expectations is a good thing to start with. Understanding the nature of what's happening to you is a good way to understand so that you can not rush to your own undoing. Like I say, no self-respecting ego would choose this journey. It's the undoing of that which you think is who you are. And it's not a comfortable process. At times it can be wonderful. At times it can be it'll always bring a sense of purpose and meaning. But interimly, there are going to be dark nights of the soul. It's inevitable that at some point a cluster of hidden structures in our ancestral karma, in our system, comes up to be experienced out, to be processed. These can be physical, these can be emotional, and these can be mental. They can be any and all three of them at different times, or even at the same time. Just means you're going faster. So when you're in your worst mood, when things are going the worst, when things are the most difficult, you can take heart, because it means real progress is occurring. It's just the reverse of what you would think. Truth is your undoing. Only delusion keeps you things comfortable and in place and happy and so on and so forth. Truth, the more undoingness is going on. When you get to the place where you can accept both You can accept your undoing and your temporary pause and connection and relaxation into what you've attained, and that they're equal to you, then you will be well equipped for making the journey quickly. Otherwise, it's good to have a realistic expectation of what's possible. Not only are you dealing with your own particular ancestral karma, your own particular cluster of karmas, but your portion of the collective karmas that has come through your ancestry. So you're not only purifying your own consciousness, you're also purifying the stream of consciousness that's come from your grandfather and great-grandfather and grandmother and all the way down to you. It is through you that these portions of the collective consciousness that are being expressed through your particular ancestral karma are becoming worked out, resolved. You're where the buck stops. That's the opportunity of one who actually begins the spiritual journey, is they start unraveling the collective structures of karma, of bondage, of ignorance, of suffering that we're all unwittingly carrying to whatever extent we're capable. And the more capable we are, the more difference we make for the world. Okay, so if that hasn't scared half of you away, I don't know what else would. But anyway, now we're going to start talking about the three paths. Now what are these three paths? Basically, there is a force at work in us when we awaken. This force or current is the life current, the current of existence. And as it awakens in us, it will find the pathway that's most open in order to grow. So the three paths reflect, maybe the best way to say it is the three channels which are relatively more or less open in us. Each of us have all these three channels. Each of them can be in varied degrees of openness or closeness. So depending upon which channels are most open, that's where the current will flow. So here in the West, many people, the channel that's most open is their understanding. Because we're so educated. We spend so many years training our minds to discipline, to think, to answer questions. And even though they occupy our attention with this inane particles of material life, they do train the consciousness, the vehicle of the mind, to be able to articulate and understand at a much greater degree than in any other time. So people who have less mental development, then the current, when they go through a spiritual awakening, doesn't go through the mental as much. It rather goes through the vital, the emotional nature, the feeling nature. And then there are some, and as in all of us, where the inclination to action is the most open current. And the energy is experienced as energy, as force, that's making the experience of energy being felt in the body. And the path for them is through action. So there's three paths. There's the path of experience, which comes through the vital, the feeling, emotional, sensual nature. And then there's the path of awareness that comes through the mental. It's the knowingness. First, it's the understanding, the curiosity, the intellectual development to understand what is the spiritual path and what it's about. Of course, we're addressing through the awareness your understanding of what is the path, because it's most developed in us. So the path of awareness is to understand. And being able to understand something, to make it understandable, means you have to get the facts and you have to fit them in with your experiences or your past knowings. And once the facts of new facts match in with your old facts, that resolution of the new and the old brings understanding. And if you just watch yourself, if you notice that when you understand something, a quietness happens. It's like, oh, now I understand. Oh, now I get it. No, now I see what's involved. That's the match at the level of knowledge, from old knowledge with new knowledge fitting together and creating something that makes a new sense. And that little moment of getting it is a piece of truth, a piece of what it is that's trying to emerge in you. And your system grows a little quiet, a little calmer, not so restless, not so confused, not so unsteady. So knowledge is where people come to understand what is God, what is truth, what is ego, what is the self, what is enlightenment. So this process of understanding is jnana. Now, understanding may have, if we can understand the spiritual path, then that really does not have any relevance until we start experiencing it. Because understanding is always through the mental. And the mind was designed to understand this material world. It was designed to be effective to teach us how to survive and succeed in this material dimension. So the mind here in the West is really very much materially based. But what you're reading about on spiritual stuff is a very complete different paradigm. And all you're going to get is an approximation, a symbol, words that are pointing to what it is, but isn't the thing itself. So we read the pointer. And if in our awareness, all we know is the pointer, it's like all you know is the menu. It's only an experience that you have the meal. So without the menu and the meal coming together, then you don't get it doesn't deepen, it doesn't integrate. And the awareness can only go so high. So on this chart we show what our previous talk, we talked about the four attainments. The first attainment being the ego, the second the self, the third God, fourth truth. So the spiritual journey is a movement upward in this both process by which what we actually are, not just our thoughts, not just our experiences, not just our willfulness and our inclinations to action, but the very core of what we are is beginning to come out of its box. It's coming out of its limitations that were set by the human system and awakening to itself as consciousness. So we can awaken, it'll awaken, but it has to awaken through the human system. It has to awaken through the vehicle. So jnana, knowledge, is one avenue of awakening, but it can only go so far without experience, without actually having an experience of the ego, an experience of the self, an experience of God, or an experience of truth. Your understanding is only a shadow of what it is. You're only understanding the pointer. You're not understanding what's being pointed to. The experience lets you know what you're being pointed to. Now, some people, when the spiritual awakening happens, like in my case, it was all experience. It was all experience. It included knowledge and it included experience right from the very beginning, but the knowledge wasn't anything my mind could understand. It was a knowingness. It was an awareness that came, which usually doesn't come until you get beyond ego. It was an awareness of something indescribable, vast, infinite, wonderful. But I didn't know what it was. But it was a recognition, a seeing. You might use the word seeing. The path of awareness, people use the word seeing. Oh, I see truth. Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I see God. I see. It's not so much experiencing. But there's always, with every awareness, there is always some experience. But if someone's strongly awareness, there's only a little bit of experience. So it's mingled in with the awareness. So you see your ego. It's complaining, it's threatened, it's angry, it's suspicious, it's distrustful. To see your ego is awareness. Otherwise, you are your ego. You are your mind. You are your emotions. You are your structure. So being able to see your ego is the first attainment. That means you've been able to separate from that you thought you were enough to be able to see it. That ability to separate you enough to watch your ego in play, doing its number, that witnessing state of consciousness, means that the consciousness is actually headed towards the self and is beginning now to see the ego. The self is one expression of the consciousness, the organizing individuality that is associated with the body begins to separate itself from its thinking, structural mind, and begins to witness it, see it. So when you begin to see the self, a couple of things happen. One, you notice how nasty the ego is. Or you notice how invested the ego is, or how attached it is, or how hooked in it is to a certain things being a certain way, to having its preferences met. You start witnessing your nature. That's awareness. And what is it? What happens when it's experienced? It feels like shit. You suddenly experience yourself being bound by an emotional, vital, physical dissatisfaction, pain, complaint, grumpiness, hatred, resentment, feeling of being the victim of other people and forces, feeling overtaken. That's experience. You're meeting the ego at the level of experience. Watching the ego and experiencing the ego. Who has the better handle at first? It's the awareness has the better handle at first. Because the emotions tend to suck us away. It tends to take our consciousness and grab it, and then we are those feelings, and we are that belief, and we are that emotional pattern. We don't have a say. So when the awareness gets stronger, then there's the ability for you to see it and to recognize that the emotions that are coming up are not real, are not true. And as soon as the awareness is strong enough to see these emotional natures are not true, then the experience tends to be able to disengage, tends to quiet, because the investment of the consciousness is less in that ancestral pattern, in that karmic pattern. And it tends to withdraw itself. It tends to lose its investment and grow quiet. That's where knowledge and experience work together. Experience tends to be more binding. It tends to be more gripping. It's more tamasic. It's more associated with the body and the emotional nature and the physical nature. But experience that occurs, for example, someone has an awakening to God, an awakening of falling in love with something larger than yourself, a sense of rapture or ecstasy. Those are all experiences. So you have an experience of rapture, ecstasy, or love that permeates your whole body, or bliss that goes through your whole body. That's totally experience. But you don't know what it is. You don't know what causes it. You don't know how to keep it. You don't understand it. You just want more of it. That's the vital nature. It just wants to feel that feeling again. It wants to keep feeling that ecstasy, that rapture, that bliss. But it doesn't have any understanding. So it can go this way and that way and this way and that way, trying to gather experience, but with no sense of where it's going. Without the awareness, without the intelligence, the emotional feeling of on the spiritual path will go this way and that way. It'll go any which way where it can have experience. If it furthers it in its spiritual progress or not, it doesn't know. It's only in the awareness that we can get a trajectory that can say, no, I don't go this way in my experience, I go this way. I don't let this seduce me. I restrain this and I go over here. Without those two collaborating, then you can get stuck in a philosophical understanding at the level of awareness of what the spiritual path is and feel arrogant and smug about what you've attained in your intellectual understanding. Or you can be an experiential gopi, running this way and that way, a bhakti, enthralled with any new master, any new teacher. All you want is a spiritual experience. Without these two in balance, there can be no steady progress. Awareness without experience is dry. It's isolated. It separates itself. It understands, remains aloof. It detaches itself. And with experience, it gets invested. It gets attached to. It clings to. It tries to hang on to things. So one becomes isolated and the other doesn't discriminate good from bad and tries to eat everything that's good, everything that it thinks it's good. It can't tell the difference what's going to allow it to progress and what's not going to allow it to progress. It eats the whole smorgasbord. So now once the spiritual path starts occurring. Of course, these are wonderful experiences because basically what's happening is the normal amount of energy we carry in our body has increased in those areas. So the normal amount of energy in the awareness path, your intelligence becomes more intelligent. You see things more clearly. It's like brighter. And you feel more in control, more able to understand, more able to separate yourself. And the tendency in that is, I don't want anything to disturb my awareness. The tendency is to isolate yourself, is to separate yourself from everything that will pull you down, which was, in that case, anything in the experiential nature that hasn't yet awakened. So your radiance comes, the radiance of consciousness fills your awareness, fills your intelligence, and you feel you have some power and some understanding and some attainment. But then there's whole chunks of experience that haven't gained access to that energy. That energy hasn't been able to move through those parts of you, to the vital, the emotional, the central parts of you. And if they do, they tend to throw you into structures that reduce your awareness, pull you back down. So there's a tendency to remove yourself from those things. In the Bhagavad Gita, that's called becoming the sannyasi. It's just saying, not this, not this, not this. Isolating yourself from the world, because that's the only way you can stay in the radiant energy of your awareness. So you close down your dome of experience, and what happens is you can only go so high, and then you'll get stuck, because you're leaving behind a whole part of yourself. It's like an anchor. Unless you break up this anchor, unless the energy can start flowing in it, it can't move on. So it tends to be somewhat aloof, arrogant, critical, tends to be more fear-based, because there's all this part of the experience that hasn't been met yet. There's all this experiential component that hasn't been resolved. It's still unconscious. It still doesn't have light. And even if you understood these things are there, your unwillingness to work on them, to open them up so the energy could move through them, isn't there. You don't want to be brought down by being thrown into those lower emotions. So you tend to be trying to run away from the very thing that you actually need to come towards to free it up so it can join you in the journey. So basically what I teach is an integral yoga, an integral journey. So without awareness, experience gets lost. And without experience, awareness gets stuck. And that's it. That's the truth. So if you have parts of yourself you still don't want to be with, you're still afraid of, you still don't want to experience, you don't want to know about, or you don't certainly want to be activated, then you stay stuck in your awareness. But if you're experiential, everything is coming up at the same time. You'll have moments of being connected to God, to oneness with everything, with nature and beauty, and then you'll lose it. And you won't know why, where it happened to it, where did it go? And you'll just try to find it again. And you'll become even worse, because once you've been ascended and you have a taste of these higher emotional experience, when they're being gone, it's like you've lost something. And then you're just seeking to have them back, so you're thrown into dejection and depression again. And without understanding, this is an endless cycle. You don't make progress, you just cycle. It's only when the awareness comes in, either within yourself or outside of yourself, you find a teacher. And a person who's experiential, they very much need a teacher, because they don't have the discrimination. And they'll go from one teacher to the other, and maybe the teacher's not much higher than them. And all they can teach is what they've understood. But it'll at least let them get in the proximity of as far as their teacher is. And this is how it is on the experiential path. It's really a crapshoot. Wonderful experiences, ecstasies, bliss. It's everybody envious of their experiences. And then the next day it's the agony. Ecstasy, agony, ecstasy, agony. Basket cases. Most teachers shy away from people who's purely experiential. And then they become very devoted to the teacher, and they hang on to the teacher, and everything the teacher says, all they want to do is believe in the teacher, and the teacher's their refuge, because they don't yet understand what it is that's happening, and they haven't come, the consciousness, the energy hasn't been able to move enough in them so they can come to their own authority in their spiritual journey. They're still feeling they need things to be a certain way, otherwise they won't be safe. They're like children in this way. So I was like a child too. For years and years I was a bhakti. But I was a bhakti that was seeking to understand. So I didn't let the experiences alone determine what I did. And that's the third component we'll talk about in a minute. Because I needed understanding. Intuitively I knew this. When I was being trained as an architect, it so happened I had to work while I was going to college, and I got a job with a structural engineer. So while I was learning structures in school, I was applying it that very day in the office I worked in. So I learned how to design beams and concrete and steel and all of these things. I learned them, understood the knowledge, and could apply it into the design of the buildings I was working on. So it's the same thing. When we get on the spiritual path and experience comes and we don't know what is the source, then the intuitive and correct intuitive action would be to understand what you've experienced. Because this movement of understanding what you experience creates an extraordinary higher state than just understanding. Understanding, like I said, is old knowledge and new knowledge fitting together. But experiencing and understanding, when those two come together, that's realization. Then it gets real for you what it is you're experiencing. And the whole journey of the spiritual process is a series of revelations about what is the reality of who you are. And that reality isn't theoretical, because in the experiential base, once you understand it, it becomes a realization. It becomes a foundational recognition or knowingness or wisdom that you never have to remember. It's always there for you. It becomes a part of your being. So when you come to the two together, experience and awareness, to ego, you reach the state of ego, and you can see your ego. You can not only understand it, you can experience it. Then what you get is a series of revelations about the nature of ego. What does it get invested in? How it gets sucked into certain ways of feeling, certain ways of believing, and it becomes intuitively available to you, both first within yourself, and then in others who are getting caught up or taken away, both in their ideas or in their moods. And you can see ego working. But for one to see ego, you have to be in self, but you may not be fully in self. And what is self, as we talked before? Self is the consciousness. It's the energy that's living you. It's the energy that's awakening, both through your mental and the experience, and the energy that's awakening through your vital experiences. Now, when you get to self, to get from the state of ego realization to the state of self realization, the third principle is action. Without action, understanding is just a theory. Unless you apply your understanding of the nature of bondage, if you don't notice your own bondage coming up and apply the effort to disengage yourself from your addiction to that bondage, from your investment in that bondage, if you don't discipline yourself sufficiently, apply enough sacrifice and effort, then that bondage remains in place. And you can be aware of it, but it won't be able to change. So for an awareness person to make it more experiential, they have to apply the effort of action. And for the experiential person to become more awareness, they have to discipline their mood, their inclination, their impulse, their reaction. They have to apply the sacrifice and effort of not running down that state of ecstasy and exhausting it, or chasing after every little tidbit, every different teacher, every different thing. It has to discipline itself sufficiently. And then what happens is the emotional nature begins to become less erratic, becomes more stable, and then there tends to be some progress in the evolution. Certainly there's still the ecstasy, and then the agony, the ecstasies and agonies, but they become less agony in the process, and you tend to not drop as low as you did before when the discipline of action is applied. And for the awareness person, the more that they can begin to take these things and live consistent with what their insights are showing them, the less discrepancy occurs between the undeveloped parts of themselves and the developed parts. And though it does tend to bring the awareness down to meet the undeveloped parts, that effort, that sacrifice, brings integration. So those are the three paths: awareness, experience, action. Now the nature of action, you should understand, only exists for self-aware human beings. Everything else is acting, but it's impulsive, it's automatic, it's only nature acting. So when we talk about action, let's be clear, we're talking about conscious, willful effort. Purposeful, conscious effort that the self-aware human being applies to itself. Every other action is we're a puppet of. Matter of fact, there are scientists who've done the studies on human nature, and they say every human being is a bioelectrical, biochemical puppet. It is simply your own biology that determines your choices. You don't have any free will. You think you have free will, you're just running hither and thither thinking this is what you want, but actually it's biology in you that's making you want something. You have a cycle where you're feeling fearful, and that's making you want to avoid things that are fearful. Or you have a energy that's coming up where you're feeling full of desire and wanting, and that's what's having you seeking something to want. And then we unwittingly reinforce it in each other. So we're lost as biological beings because of this programming that comes with every body. So those actions that we take from the automatic portions of our nature that have been programmed into us or we've unwittingly indulged in ourselves, that is an action. That isn't yogic action, because all of these are yogas. It's not purposeful action. So purposeful action is the key here. Conscious, willful intention to heading towards something that right now you don't know except maybe as an extrapolation of some awareness or some experience. You have a hint of God, you have a hint of truth, and that hint gives you something of what it is. And you can project that moment when your awareness could see truth, or that moment when your experience could feel God, and you could take those glimpses and project them, extrapolate to a state of continuous awareness, continuous experience. So this is I call the trajectory. When awareness or experience comes, then I say the journey begins, because faith starts. Faith is that which can see at the beginning or sense at some level, not just mind or experience, but some deep level, arises from the very core of us, what the end of the journey will be. It can sense right here, right now, in the awakening that has come, be it in awareness or be it in experience, of what the end will be. This happened for me very distinctly, because the experiences were very intense, and I did not understand the source of them. They went on for about 2 months. And then I saw a video of my teacher. And in that video, as soon as my attention saw him, I saw the completion of what was trying to awaken in me. Instantaneously, I experienced the end of a journey that I was just at the beginning in. And it created such ecstasy, so much force that it drove me mad. It was too much for my system to handle at first. So I had to, so much energy was coming from that real getting in touch with where it was going that my system wasn't stable. It was very unstable, too much energy, way beyond what my system could handle. So I had to come to a point where he could recognize me. When I heard that he knew of me and that he was coming to be my teacher, that restlessness quieted, and it became able to be okay with being at the beginning of a journey that I had already had a taste, the end of. And this coming to some stability, this being able to see that I was now on a path, I was now on a track, and now my job was just to simply stay on track, was a great consolation at that stage. But I had preparation. I understood the notion of teachers and gurus, and before all this happened, even though I wasn't meditating at that time, when I was younger, I understood these things. When one has come to any stage of the journey, these three principles together allow for the journey to complete. So you go from ego, from the recognition of ego. In the self, you don't actually realize the ego until you're in the self. And you don't realize self sometimes until you're either in truth, usually not until you're in truth. You're in the self, but you don't know you're in the self. The only way you can tell you're in the self is all you do is live for God. All you do is live for truth. When you come to the self, those are the symptoms. You may not know you're in the self. It's not self-realization yet. But you know all you want is God or truth. That's the evidence you've been in the self. And what do you'll see? You'll see all the blockages and the barriers that are in the way for you to becoming stabilized in that state that you're seeking to develop in you. When you come to God, there's two aspects, two expressions that can occur. One is God, which is merger, which means this ecstasy and love grows and grows and grows until you lose yourself for a period of time. You merge with that principle of God. You merge in your experiences. And your mind shuts down, everything shuts down, and you're just in ecstasy for some period of time. It could be minutes, it could be hours. Usually it's not more than a few days, because the system can't handle it in experience unless it's been well developed. So it goes on for a while, and then it quiets down, and you return over months, maybe even years, back into more normal consciousness. It can't stay, because until the whole system is brought up equally, it can't stay. It'll fade away. And then the other experience is when you're going from self to truth. Now I call that, instead of merger, it is a merger, but it's a unity, a state of unity. This occurs in the awareness, where you feel you're one with the universe. You feel an infinite vastness and power, a sense of tremendous presence and awareness. So there's this sense of this. And when this happens, you're heading towards it, you feel it more and more and more, and then you disappear in it. When you come back, it also stays, in many cases, for a longer period of time. Part of what I experience is people who come to truth. Truth has a special effectiveness. Unity has a greater effectiveness for establishing consciousness in a higher state of being than merger. Because merger tends to still be vested in the emotional nature, the feeling nature, the mood nature, and it's always subject to the cycles of the gunas and the cycles of the moon and the sun and the rest of it. But in truth, it's not dependent on any of those cycles. So someone who comes to a state of unity can step out of their identification with ego completely. They can become established in a permanent state of witnessing. Not always, but we have examples of Jed McKenna and Eckhart Tolle. They stepped out of their human paradigm, and they were able, into their awareness, not to lose themselves in their emotional nature, or lose themselves in the unexperienced parts of themselves. They were able to bring the force of their awareness of unity into the work of the undeveloped parts of themselves, and were able to, through that conscious knowledge, dismantle the habit of ego. So in many ways, truth is quicker, it's more effective, but it leaves out the bliss, the connection, the feeling of compassion and relationship with everything. While the path of truth, it's disconnected, it's separated. It's I stand alone in the eternal unchanging. I am the pure presence and awareness. And though there is a distance feeling for everybody else who is in their human bondage, it's not the same as one who's come to God, because coming to God is in the heart. Coming to truth is in the head. The two are interrelated, so if someone fully comes to truth, the heart will open up, but it will be more impersonal. But if you come to the heart first, and then truth opens up later, then there'll always be this deeper compassion for what it is to be in bondage, of what it is to suffer, of what it is to be miserable. So I traveled this journey. For me, I went this journey to God first. I lived in God for the longest period of time. Truth didn't come till later. So it left me with an ability to function in the world with other human beings at the level that they are at. A willingness to come down into their misery and to their compassion, to hold their hand or to support them emotionally, give them the information, and give them the strength to take the necessary actions. So this creates a guru, someone who goes to God, not true, creates a guru. The guru is a compassionate force working with individual people in their own journey to consciousness, while one who is in truth is vaster, a larger group of people, less personal, less individual. So what does this determine? Depending upon your nature, it'll depend how you manifest when you do attain the higher states. And your capacity for taking conscious, willful actions from the authority of your own essential nature, your own essential being. Finding that place of authority in yourself gives you the strength to take the actions that are contrary to the parts of yourself that are still undeveloped. You become the adult in yourself rather than the child. You step out of your victimhood and you gain the authority to start reorganizing your whole system. So this process typically happens of gaining your own authority, happens quite naturally in the path of truth. But on the path of bhakti, it takes much more effort to get this sense that I'm the one responsible for what I'm experiencing. I am the source of my experience, and I have a say. I can let it remain or I can change it. Okay. Now, at the beginning, the bhakti path is clearly more fun. No doubt about it. But it won't get you there without truth, without knowledge. And this knowledge isn't just the intellectual knowledge we talked about at the beginning of the path, because when jnana gets to a certain point, it's a radiant awareness, a radiant presence. And here in the West, it's very strongly emphasized correctly that our radiant presence is what allows us to see what's hidden in us and to allow ourselves to step back from it. And in the process, once we begin to see with our radiant presence what in us is not yet able to be in the radiant presence, we release the bondage that keeps those parts of ourselves from experience matching, coming to the same state. So the radiant presence is a very powerful transformative force. And you combine that with bhakti, it can be a very effective, very total, very integrated progress for the spiritual person. So how do you know which path is yours? How do you know which is the one you're most inclined to? Well, just look in your own experience. Are you more understanding, more in awareness, more developed in the mental? Or is it more in the heart, or in the body, or in the feeling? Is there a strong impulse to action? A strong drive to do something with this knowledge? A strong drive to do something with this experience? Or is it fairly weak, more passive? Every one of these three paths require sacrifice. For the path of action, usually there's a lot of aspiration, this wanting something now. Action drives its basis, willful action drives its basis from desire. So I want to attain God now. It wants to attain truth now. Very impatient, very restless. So the training of the sacrifice for the path of action is to sacrifice the outcome. You can act all you want. You can strive very, very hard, but don't get attached to the outcome. Don't believe that you're going to be enlightened tomorrow or next week or next month or in a few years. Take the action for free as a sacrifice. to work for truth, to work for the oneness, to strive on the spiritual path, to let go of the things that have held you back as a human being and go forward even when there's no evidence. So a path of action may not necessarily have as much awareness or as much experience as a bhakti or a jnani, but they have more faith. They have more ability to let go over time with their old self. They keep sacrificing it. Very few people travel this journey just in the path of action. Mostly, this kind of action is self-giving, an undoing of itself through sacrifice for serving others. But you can't really serve others. You'll probably serve your own ambition for God, your own desire for God, unless there's bhakti. If there's bhakti, if there's experience, then you'll use the action in you to serve the teacher, or to serve the spiritual awakening in other people. That'll be the action that you'll be willing to take, and there'll be a strong drive to do so. And if you're on the path of jnana, and the action is strong, then you will teach. You will be a teacher. You will want to show people through your knowledge and your understanding of what it is you traveled. Show them how to do it themselves. When these three are equal and integrated, one will reach the integrated state, which includes the universal, impersonal, which is truth, the universal personal, which is God, and the individual personal, which is ego, and the individual impersonal, which is self. The individual personal is the personal ego, which even though you've awakened, you still have an ego. Because if you don't have an ego, you can't manifest. You can't talk, you can't act. You can't do anything in your manifestation without a body, a vehicle, a mind, a heart, capacities for speech. And that's individual personal. But at the same time, the individual personal is there. There's also the individual impersonal there, who's witnessing, noticing, present with the egoic component, the personal individual egoic component, and by its presence, the individual personal becomes more impersonal, and the impersonal, individual impersonal becomes more personal. They merge together. So they're both a person, and yet there's no one there. It's a curious quality. Somebody's there, seems really friendly and communicative and expressive and right there for you, and there's no one there at the same time. Now, not everybody can sense that. Then there is also the universal impersonal, which is true, and those of you who work with me know that I go there when I do the Sat weekends or in the silent retreats. I go into the universal impersonal, and the universal impersonal is where I live. I rest in universal impersonal. That's my foundation. And then I have the universal personal, which is the bliss, the ecstasy, the force of energies that come off of through this system that brings you states of delight and love and connection and oneness and peace. So this is the goal, an integrated state, capable of operating in all dimensions, makes you more effective with more different people, no matter what their systems are. If they're more awareness, or if they're more experiential, or if they're more action. So if that's the final integration, how can you tell if you're capable of it? Well, you don't. You can't know. And it's not even your problem. Your problem is forget everything else but your own journey to God or truth. Your job is to forget everything else, forget teaching, forget manifestation, and purify your own system and move into relationship with your divine potential. And then you'll leave it to God. If you have a teacher, he'll assist you. He'll demand more awareness if you're experiential, and if you're awareness, he'll demand more experience. He'll push you towards an integrated state, but you don't have to worry about that. You just have to suffer the teacher calmly. Okay. All right. So that's this revelation.